specifically talk about?
Well, good morning, everyone. And for those who stayed for this morning's town hall meeting about finances, I really appreciate you sticking around. And I also would like to thank the members of our panel today. We have Jane Matsumoto, who is our Ad Council Chair, Scott Fujita, who is our Finance Chair, and Gary Sakaguchi, who is our Church Treasurer. So thank you, everyone, for participating today. So the way how we're going to run this town hall is I'm going to ask a few questions, and hopefully we'll get some answers. But I'm going to be also opening it up to the congregation for any questions that people would ask. And I'm going to go and bring the mic over to you. So if you could, when I open it up for questionings, if you could raise your hands, so that way I'll bring that microphone to you. Okay? All right. So the first question that I'm asked by people is, so what is the purpose of pledging? And perhaps someone from the panel could address that. Maybe Jane, would you mind?
You want to repeat the question for everybody again?
Yeah. So the question was, what is the purpose of pledging?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Many of you might have just heard my testimony a couple of Sundays ago. And in that part of my sharing, I mentioned that pledging is all about our commitment to help support our church and to enable our leaders to be able to plan for the given year. As you know, each year the church develops a new budget. We start from zero, and we create a budget to help our ministries. And in order for each of the leaders, especially for finance leaders, to know how to plan where we can put our resources, requires a comfort level of knowing that your giving, your commitment in the form of pledges, can be depended upon so that we can plan the calendar and budget for these ministries in a very fruitful and assured way. So that's really the essence of pledging.
Right. So let me touch a little bit on top. And I want this to be really informal, real casual. So we're just kind of sitting here, just more conversational with you all. But you know, from a finance committee perspective, as Jane mentioned, we do an annual budget for the church. And being that we are, you know, nonprofit organization, we have to make sure that the amount that we spend in all of our programming and ministries for our pastoral staff and administrative support and all that, and to run the church, it balances out with the income that we have. So obviously we start with trying to figure out how much we're going to get in terms of fundraising, offering, donations, and any special programs that may bring funds in for us. And then at that point, we take a look at, you know, everything else from how much we're going to spend. And obviously, if they don't balance, we have the tough task of trying to make sure things balance. And I think that's where we, as a finance committee, and we're going to be doing this in November, is really try to take a close look at where we're going to be. And so pledging is really, as Jane said, that commitment to what you all feel like you can give. And that commitment, and Stanley will probably ask more questions, and if I answer some of these ahead, I apologize, but the pledging is really your personal spiritual commitment to God. No one sees it except for one person that keys it into our tracking system. And when you get these letters at the middle of the year, right, and at the end of the year, it's really just for you to know where you're at, and that's all it really is. It's a commitment, but that commitment helps us from a planning perspective.
One of the things that I think Stanley has on his questions, and I shared in my testimony, was if I give anyway, and I'm offering, giving offering, then what difference does it make? What's the difference between giving donations and offering and pledges? And the big difference with that is it doesn't help us if we don't know what your intentions are, because of course, if you're going to send a big check at the end of the year or in the middle of the year, that's fantastic. And of course, the church is so grateful. But if we had known that that was your intention, then it allows us to be able to plan, again, in advance, recognizing that there's that commitment there that we can count on. And that's the difference between just voluntary donations when you're moved versus having made a commitment that the church can depend on that giving as part of their planning process.
Right. So, and let me take that one step further, right, is, pledging is really just the steps that you go through to personally commit yourself each year. You're actually when you give your weekly giving, right, your weekly tithe, that's actually your offering, right? So we used to, we'll track it as what we'll call offering. Donations, let me differentiate that a little bit with donations. Donations often are these special gifts that you all will graciously give to us for maybe a specific type of situation, specific ministry, or just to help better the church as a whole. But it's those one-off, we'll call them donations, and we'll treat that. It also goes into the general funds, of course, but it is, we'll call it a donation versus offering as a part of what you're trying to commit to, just kind of on a week-to-week type of, week-to-week, month-to-month, whatever you're comfortable with type of basis. So. Go ahead, Gary. Yeah, sorry.
Gary, you want to weigh in? You get to count the money. So.
Yeah. Okay, so it's not, as Reverend Allison mentioned in the sermon, it's not only, we're speaking of monetary, but for myself, I've committed myself in terms of service, and so I'm the treasurer, and I've committed myself to being the treasurer for the coming year. And Reverend Allison's going like this. Just 1 year? But
in addition to the 3 that he's done, or 2 that he's done.
Right. But it's of a similar nature. It's not only monetary, but it's of service in terms of what you're able to provide to the church and helping this church fulfill itself in terms of all the needs that are needed for all the services that are provided.
Thank you everyone for your response. And a lot of times I get this question. The question is, what if I pledged and then I find out by the end of the year maybe I fall short? What happens then?
We're coming for you. No, I'm kidding. Honestly, like I had explained, the pledge is basically, it's a personal commitment that you do between yourself and God, right? It's really, it's an act that we ask everyone to go through. Finance does get some, like I said, some capability to gain, to be able to plan better, but at the end of the day, right? At the end of the year, we know that everyone is going to try their best to give whatever they can, and that's what they try to commit from the start. But life happens, right? During the pandemic, people lost their jobs. There were circumstances where people couldn't give as much, and it's a part of God's plan, right? And that also means God understands, what you're able to do and whatnot. And so again, it's a personal commitment that you guys are doing between you and God. So it's not one of these things where we use it for planning, of course, but we also understand that it's all it is just your way to track and where you stand with things and how you feel you want to give.
I'm going to go back to that little sharing I did, but I put up a Bible verse from the book of Corinthians. And from a Christian perspective, the takeaway that I got from that was that God wants you to give with a cheerful heart. So, yeah, you have many other financial commitments, and sometimes they seem pretty oppressive. But when it comes to your giving at church, I think especially in the gifts that you give here, we also want to make sure that this comes from a place where you're giving cheerfully, knowing that you're helping to grow God's kingdom here and sharing it with the family of faith that's trying to produce ministries and activities that fulfill our mission to open our hearts and open our minds.
You? I'm going to follow up on that. This is another question that I've been asked. So how has the pandemic affected our church finances? And maybe Scott, I'm going to let you go and answer that question first.
I mean, to be honest, the pandemic did have an impact on not just us or just Faith United Methodist Church, but a lot of businesses, as you all know, right? And it's impacted, because we weren't here in person. I think it changed the habit of giving. It also changed the habit of how we spend and the kind of programming we did. And if you think about it, back during the pandemic, there was a lot of our ministries and programming that couldn't meet here in person, and they tried to do it on Zoom. A lot of the programming that they would do to maybe food ministries, Master's Kitchen, for example, they weren't able to do it during the pandemic for obvious reasons. And so as such, not only was the amount of money that came in through offering and donations was a little bit down, of course, but so were the costs to run the church and to do all the ministries. People weren't doing all the ministries that cost us in our budget, as well as we weren't running the air conditioning in the summer because we weren't here, for example. So it was almost a balance. And we did in the first year have the ability to receive that PPP, which is the government assistance that helped us out as well, as a lot of businesses and nonprofits had done. And last year, we had some adjustments we had to make, but as a result, because we weren't able to get an appointment that was a good fit for us from an associate perspective, that also impacted some of our expense side of our budget. So overall, pandemic-wise, yes, it had an effect, but from a bottom line perspective, we were still okay. So I mean, and if anyone ever wants to know about the actual details or numbers, I'm more than happy to share it. I have financial reports that we run every month, and I'm more than willing to meet with anybody to talk in that level of detail. I won't bore you guys with the numbers, but know that, yes, it did have impact, but everything worked out fine.
So this goes back once again to how we started our conversation on this aspect of pledging being a commitment, because for those who did pledge and were able to fulfill their commitment, even though our giving was down from those who give when they attend things, or an event happens, or a program that they like is executed, or they give for a particular cause, when those things didn't happen during the pandemic, we didn't receive those gifts. But for those who made a commitment with the pledge, in spite of the pandemic, then those gifts came in and they could be depended upon. And that is why pledging is so vital, because when situations like this occur, which was completely unexpected, we still, as much as our operating costs may have been down because we didn't turn the lights on, or we didn't need the air conditioning, we didn't have as many ministries, we still have fixed expenses that the churches had to meet, and our ministries pivoted in a different way from being on site. So while those donations may have fallen short because things were not being done in person, those who stayed true to their pledge commitments helped our church see us through that particular season of an unexpected shortfall to be able to meet our obligations. And that's one of the things that we want to emphasize, why pledging is so different and so vital and important from the sense of keeping faith working in all circumstances.
And I think the one thing I would add too is, one thing that the Finance Committee has in place that we put in place several years ago is in these type of situations that may come up where, we may have a shortfall of some type, we do have a reserve, right? So we allow and have actually a 6-month reserve built into our capital. And so we are fairly well positioned that in some type of disaster or catastrophic event, right, we do have a 6-month reserve that we don't ever want to have to touch because that means something really bad's happened, right? But we do have that. We also are kind of taking these steps forward now that we have a subcommittee that's working on making our money that we do have work better for us, meaning that, rather than sitting in a CD or sitting in a no interest bearing, checking or savings account or money market account, we're looking and moving forward with investments. So putting monies that we know are monies that we have ability to store away for the long term, we're gonna make that work for us better. And let, especially now with the stock market being on the lower end, hopefully this is a great time for us to get into that investment market and let our money work for us. So we have a number of different vehicles and strategies that we're doing to ensure that, we're always gonna be financially sound as best as we can. But it all starts with you all, of course, right? So.
Gary, you get to write the checks. What have you seen? Any differences during the pandemic as far as, what comes in, what goes out, and also when you do the counting?
Yeah, so I'll start with the counting. I guess with counting, I count on a monthly basis. I'm also volunteer to help organize all the counters. So we have basically 4 teams of counters for 1 week out of every month, and we are able to see the amount of donations that are coming in. I'm not necessarily keeping track of it, but where we do need a team to be able to account for that and give that to our financial secretary, Rachel, and have her be able to keep all the books going as far as the expenses. That's a part of it, but there's also other donations that are coming in that we don't see physically when we count every week. But beyond that, as far as expenses, the expenses are constant. And if you saw the checks that I'm not writing them, Rachel writes the checks, and I'm reviewing them to make sure that they're properly done and that they're in line with what they're supposed to be, that we're not spending money on things that we shouldn't be, always putting into question whether if there's something is in error or if there's something that needs to be questioned from other perspectives, have other eyes look at it. But if you saw the checks that I see, there's a lot of money that's going out for the church in terms of its operating expenses. It's amazing. It's amazing what the church has to pay money for just to run. And that's the thing that comes into realization of why the pledges are so important. To be able to not only anticipate the expenditures that are going to have to be paid for just the regular operations. But the church is a church, and we have its ministries, and we also want to be able to provide for the ministries that the church provides for. And so without those pledges, we are not able to really anticipate that. We're going to be doing a budget next week for the coming year, 2023. And a lot of that budget depends on just the pledges. Because we need to understand, as was said from Jane and Scott, that what we can anticipate in terms of what's coming in. Based on what income we got, we could determine what kind of budget we could anticipate for the expenditures. And if you run your own household expenses, you know that you could only spend so much based on what you anticipate income coming in. And so that's kind of running the same way. And so it's difficult for us to be able to really be able to understand what we can spend for if we're not anticipating any proceeds to be coming in, and that being primarily the pledges. And if we're going through the budget and we see that we could only anticipate so much pledge, then we unfortunately have to cut short on certain areas, and that becomes difficult.
Yeah, and we generally will take a look at history of what was given this past year. We'll take the last 12 months and kind of use that as a starting basis. We also take into account all the pledge cards that come in as well. You know, and so honestly, if we see that pledging is down, we have to reduce our budget for next year, because based off of that's all we know is based off of history, right? But at the same time, you know, we also try to kind of fill in some of the gaps with fundraising, right? And we also know that there's a lot of special donations that will come in, right? And so we've been very blessed in that, you know, even though pledging or the offering side of the income line is down a little bit, right? We've, for example, done very well on the fundraising we've done this year through the 3 marketplaces. In fact, they came in ahead of where we had anticipated, which helps out a lot, right? And so, you know, I know, Stanley, one of your questions was, hey, we're doing all this fundraising, we're asking for all this money through fundraisers in addition to pledges, to people pledging. Does that mean we're in a bad situation? Absolutely not. What it really means is it's our way to fill in the gap. It's our way to be able to still sustain the kind of programming and ministries that this church is accustomed to and used to. Let's take the example of this weekend with the Halloween Carnival. That doesn't run for free, but we don't charge kids to come in and trick or treat on premise, right? And so we get a lot of donations through giving of the food that Anise had listed. All the youth are volunteering their time to run the booths. We do have to spend some money on buying some, you know, little prizes and whatnot. But I mean, it doesn't run itself, right? And so it's the fundraisers that we do, in addition to pledging and special donations, that really help make the events that we run what they are. And everyone knows, for example, and I can tell you because my son's been participating for years. I mean, it's always, and even during the pandemic, the trunk or treat format. But now we're back to full, you know, Halloween Carnival, and it's you know, it speaks for itself. That's just one of my examples. But
I think that's a really good example that Scott's giving. When we have our programs through our ministries, we really present these as gifts to those who come, and we receive donations, but largely our programs are all planned with the expectation that our budget, the resources that flow through you, will enable us to plan these programs, whether they're for, as Scott mentions, and I'm sure it touches his heart because he has a young child, but even things like our meal programs. Blessed Bento is an example that we have had for a decade or more, and that ministry, while it was in our budget, largely was what we coined self-supporting, because we received a lot of donations from the folks that we supported. But if in the event that our donations are not offset to cover the expenses, this is where we know with your pledging that we don't have to rely on occasional or unpredictable giving, and that with your committed pledges, we know how to allocate those monies for things like the Halloween or Senior Meals Program. Now, something that I mentioned that I would share today was that I was talking to someone about our ministries at Faith, and they're not a church, they're not church going, so they asked me, oh, that sounds fantastic, your church is so active. Where does your funding come from? And I thought it was a really interesting question, because to an average person who's not churched, they're used to having, they expect subsidies from government. They think, well, you know, when you think of large institutions, how do they support themselves? And a lot of organizations come from giving from resources that they really don't have direct control over. Whereas for a church, a local church, 100% of what we do comes straight out of our members and congregations' pocket. It's not that the government is sending us a check from someplace. It's not that we get a subsidy from someplace. Although more recently, we have been very lucky to have been a beneficiary of a grant from Cato, for example, which allows us to expand our meals program for seniors. But that is something that is by the grace of God, who put this grant in front of us, and Cato approved it. There are going to be other needs that may come up that we want to do, but we really don't have a source of funding. The only place that we can count on are through your generous gifts of giving through your pledges, and of course, donations, and when we have to, through fundraising.
And I don't want it to sound like we're here pleading out for people to give money, because that's not what we're doing. Really, this is here just to help people understand, because I think there's a lot of misconception out there of the stewardship campaign that we do every year, and it's traditional, right? We do this every year. It goes the whole month, you know, and honestly, we probably could cover it in 2 weeks, right? Because people don't want to hear it over and over. But I think this is that forum, really, for the people that, you know, have the questions. And I really wanted it to be more, you know, us letting you know kind of where we're at, right? Understand what finance has to, you know, work with when it comes to budget planning, paying the bills every week, et cetera, et cetera. But this is really, you know, I don't want it to sound like we're doing that, you know, and we're here to help answer your question too. So, Stanley, I almost want to kind of we did a lot of talking.
Yeah.
I almost want to see if there's any
Questions.
questions
Yes. So
that we can help you with.
yeah. So Kathy,
What paid staff are you budgeting for?
I'm sorry, what paid staff are we
Are you going to be budgeting for?
All of them.
what church staff are we going to be budgeting for the next coming year or
so-
this year?
I mean, the existing staff is going to continue. We're going to hire an organist or pianist. We're looking to fill a music director. What else? I think from when I looked at the SPRC budget that just got submitted and proposed, you know, again, we're hoping come appointment time in July, we can get an associate appointed, because I think that's something that we've been looking for the right fit. But SPRC, knowing that appointment year or appointments mid-year are tough, the way they budget it is, it'll, you know, they're looking to fill that come July 1st. So those are the 3 new ones that I've seen. We currently have an AV coordinator, which is Chad. We have our office staff, which is Sandy and Julie, our pastoral ministers, and then Rachel, our financial secretary. So, and then there's a lot of back end, I'll call it indirect support too, like Maria, who's our janitorial staff, for example. So, I mean, we're fully staffed from the perspective of our scale and size. Did that answer what you're asking, Kevin?
This is probably very minor to you, but I'm a
That's
very
fine, that's okay.
conservative person, and I see that you send out the good news to everyone, which costs $1.35 or so to send out. Why can't we just pick it up here? Because that
Right.
way you
And I believe they are. So I think there was a big campaign to, a lot of us just get emails. I know during announcements, Anise does a terrific job of letting everyone know it's online through our website, right? So you can get to it electronically that way. There are some people that still prefer the snail mail paper style. Maybe they're not as savvy on email or going online. So they have gone through that process to already scale down as much from a postage perspective, because we are looking at these indirect operational costs that happen, such as postage. I mean, I know BOT is very conscientious of running the AC when it's not absolutely necessary, you know, that type of stuff. But yeah, no, I agree. That was a bigger problem before, and it's definitely gotten a lot better from an expense perspective over the past year.
Before Reverend Allison, just as minor as you think that is, when I'm running the checks and sending it out, very minor, but I'm always conscientious about expenditures. And so when there's a reimbursement, like for example, Chris Kamatani, she has reimbursements for the senior events almost weekly. And I appreciate that she's willing to pick up the check. And rather than putting it in the mail, so putting another postage on that particular item, gas or SCE, they're coming in. We have like two to three different bills all going to the same address. The check run is the same, 3 different checks, 3 different bills, but I stuff them all in so we have one,
Just one
you know,
envelope.
save
Little
on some
things.
postage, just small things like
Just the
that.
little
But
things.
it's not a small question, so it's all a part of
And we're very much
cost
aware of
savings.
trying to streamline as much as we can. That's why we're here, so.
Sorry.
No, it's just a clarification. We can definitely go back to picking up good news. It was just during the pandemic, it just became, it was the mode of mailing, so we just haven't stopped and changed that. So we can go back to people picking up. But I know that Barbara had a connecting question.
You can always ask or tell Sandy to take you off the mailing list. That's what we have done now. Because since we're here almost all the time, we could just pick it up.
Right.
And so just because they've been mailing it to you and you feel badly about the expense, just have her take you off the mailing list because you're going to pick up.
Yeah, and Reverend Allison, maybe we can make an announcement to say, no, now that we're back in person, you know, newsletters for those that want a paper copy will have limited, you know, amounts available in the narthex, right? And try to save on some of the postage as well. I mean, that's an idea too.
Just
So.
FYI, postage is coming up again next year.
Uh-oh.
And I know because I still buy postage stamps, so I still mail everything out.
We better start buying some forever stamps now then. I'm just kidding.
So it's coming up again, so that they don't say, but they just tell you it's coming up. And it affects me because I still buy stamps,
Right.
so, you know.
Yeah.
I don't know, you buy the forever stamp, you buy the book and you just pay for it. I don't know what it is right now, but it's coming up, that's all I'm saying, just keep listening to it. Hey, I better buy some more books by the end of the year. That's all I tell myself.
Yes. Yes, good point, Helen. You know, postage is going up. It is going to be very expensive. So thank you for your concern. I have another question here.
Thanks, Stanley. First of all, I want to give this chance to thank each one of you for the work that you're doing. I know it takes a lot of your time, personal time. You are volunteers of the church, and I appreciate what you do for the church, so thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Question about historically apportionments to the conference has been a very important part of this church, making that 100% every year. Is that still the case, and is that the plan going forward?
So apportionments, right, is our commitment to the conference, right? Historically, we pride ourselves in being that we can pay 100% of our apportionments every year. This last year was the exception, but that's because the conference had made the exception in communicating to all churches in the conference that if, due to the pandemic, if you pay your apportionments at 75%, then we're still going to recognize it as 100%. Now the plan, so we did that this year, right? And there was a variety of different reasons and factors that we ended up doing that, because our original budget was to maintain 100% this year, but there was some budget adjustments that we needed to make, and so since we had the ability to offset some of that money that we needed to recuperate earlier in the year, we opted to go 75% this year on apportionment. Now next year the plan is to go back to 100% of that in the budget. That's the plan at this point. And then we'll be back on track to traditionally what we've been doing.
We have another question here.
I have a question. You know, when we donate to a group, the group receives the money that you donate to them?
The answer is yes. So I know this has been a topic that's come up many of times, right? And we encourage everyone to be able to support the ministries that they are very active in, for example. The one thing I would explain about that, right, is when someone earmarks or puts a memo on their check and earmarks it for a specific ministry, it then becomes a designated fund, okay? And what that basically means is someone will say, hey, I want to donate X amount to a specific ministry. Let's say, MYF. And so now we have to track that because we're obligated, if the ask and request is to dedicate that to just the MYF, we have to make sure we do that. Now, we don't have separate bank accounts for every ministry. We have one big bank account, one big checking account. And so we have to be able to track how much we spend against each of the ministries, which we do. But we also now have to track how much people give toward those. So it's an increased accounting, and we have volunteers that are doing it. And bless their hearts, they spend a lot of time tracking that. Now, and that's fine, but I know there's been discussion, and you may have heard it from me before, that if it's in your heart to give to the church in general, it's going to trickle down to any ministry that needs the money, right? So if it's youth, it's going to go there. If it's, prime timers, it's going to go there, right? So your money, either way, whether you designate it or not, is going to go to benefit all ministries. If you designate it, that's perfectly fine. We encourage that too, but know that it's just a little bit more housekeeping and bookkeeping on our end. So, but you can.
And that goes back to why pledging is so important. Because these gifts that we receive for certain things that are allocated are simply that. They're gifts. But the programs that are planned, whether it's a music ministry or a MYF ministry or a senior meals ministry, are really set forward through the budget process. So by your pledging, we are able to see what kind of programs can be planned every year. And as we receive your gifts, in addition to what we have forecast for the budget, simply enables us to enhance more or allocate these gifts to things that really need more resources. And I think that, to Scott's point, there is, of course, administrative work to track these things, but we want to see all of our ministries flourish. And so giving is up to the individual. Pledging certainly is too, but your commitments through pledging enables us to have some advanced foresight in what kind of programs we can be sure to deliver. And thank you for any gifts that we receive as a result of executing those ministries.
You know, and one thing I would like to add too, what I've seen happen for people that really want to give to a specific ministry and help them benefit in a certain way. An example I've seen happen is someone, let's say, like Rick, right? Rick would donate a lot of equipment, right? And we'd recognize that, we'd acknowledge it, you know, but his giving was, you know, not only through his time, as we know, but even through, and not even through his financial giving, but even just through giving like 10 mics, you know, and we would be able to, he'd be able to still take, for example, the donation as treated as a donation or a write-off, right? But he was then able to designate specifically how he wants to benefit the ministry, right? And so I've seen cases where people would donate, you know, specific items, and we can definitely acknowledge, you know, what's been given, and you can still recognize the gift. So that's another way that you can also give too. So.
Or I think of like our summer camp programs. We'll put out, I see Pearl sitting here. We can also, we do also communicate to the church when very specific things are appreciated in the form of a tangible gift rather. I mean, of course, we'll always receive your financial gifts, but there are opportunities, like Scott says, to give specifically to certain ministries doing certain things with specific needs.
Any other questions?
Any other questions on the floor? Okay. Well, I do have two more questions, and they're what I call housekeeping questions. And so the first question is, if I give online, and this is a question I get, if I give online, do I need to give a pledge card or send in a pledge card every year?
Yeah, I can take that. Yeah, I mean, the answer is yes, right? The pledge card is just the commitment side. Whether it's online, or you do a check and drop it in the box, or you do one of these fancy online Venmo, you know, apps or whatever, right? That's the methodology of how you're, you know, making your offering. The pledge card is just the exercise and the act of your commitment to us. That's all that is. So yes, we do want a pledge card. Despite how you want to give it, you can give it, like I said, online, check. You can do it weekly, monthly. Some people give quarterly. You know, it's up to you. But that pledge card will help you identify how you want to do that.
Have the pledge cards gone out? Sorry. No, we'll do a soft kind of like trial on online giving pledge cards next week, and so we'll launch that, and then we'll do the hard card starting November. So that would kind of
Right. So talk about saving postage, right? Instead of sending out the letter, the traditional letter with the actual card, right? We'll still do that for those that don't go online, but we've made it so easy, thanks to Inese and some of the staff, to just go to the website and click on a link and just fill in the blanks, you know?
Yes. So one of the things that is planned is we're going to have videos as to how to give online and also how to fill
Nice.
out the pledge card online.
So like tutorials.
Yeah, yes,
That's great.
tutorials. So Inese is working on it right now. So once that's done, we'll make that announcement as to how to get that done. But thank you for that question. Okay.
You're still gonna have your boxes of cards though.
Yes.
Yeah,
So.
I'm a dinosaur, okay? I'm old school, so.
Which brings me to the next housekeeping question, And you know, I get asked this all the time. Can I keep my offering box number? And and I'm going to tell you right now, you know, the number of people giving with envelopes nowadays has actually dwindled a lot since the first time I ever did stewardship. And I've given out 300 boxes of offering envelopes once upon a time. And you know, that was fine. This is before everything either went online, right? But because so many people are now giving online, I am contemplating actually starting to, I'm sorry to say, think about changing the offering box number. Just to give you an idea, it costs about $4 and change to get a offering box, you know, given out. And the church, Rachel just gave me the invoice of how much it costs per year, and it's almost $1,000 to buy the offering boxes. And the other thing is not everyone is using their envelopes. So we end up dumping about 50 to 60 boxes a year. And I really like to cut down the waste of the being forced to dump the envelope. In fact, one of my tasks is to actually clear out Rachel's office of all these offering boxes and envelopes that we won't be using, and it's about 5 years worth of wasted envelopes. So I will be asking folks, can I begin paring down the number of offering envelopes in order to save the church money and to spend the money in a more meaningful way, especially with ministries, because we're going to have some needs ministry-wise in the next coming years. And I like to spend that money in a much better way than buying offering envelopes. So. Yeah, because that's what I'm.
Yeah, I think that's the idea, right? Is before we'd buy a block of 200, right? If we use, say, 125 of them, why don't we just buy 125 and just reassign numbers, and we'll just update the numbers in the system? The numbers they don't mean anything, right? The numbers are just an assignment, just for identification purposes. So, you know, whatever number we assign you, and it may change year to year depending on number of people that get boxes, you know, depending how we sort it all. But the system will be updated to match, so that way, when you do give through your envelope, your name and your giving will be recorded correctly, right? And if there's any error in that assignment of new number, then you know we'll be quick to react to get that fixed. So.
Alice has a question.
But then I use only one. So, you know, I've been throwing away.
So,
Yeah, they only come in boxes every week. I don't think Stanley, I don't know if they have options of buying some that are monthly, you know, a box of 12 or a box of 4 for quarterly or whatever. I don't know.
yeah, so we've been actually playing around with the idea of using blank envelopes and just putting, numbers.
Why not these and then one that says pledge, a different color?
Yeah, because trying to number them is really work intensive, and just putting names on the envelope takes a lot of time. Like I know so because I do this every year. So,
Actually, Norman, you can actually use these, and you can just check it. This is a portion of my pledge. But they want to have a number associated with it.
yeah.
Well, but as long as their name is on there, as long as your name is printed clearly on there, we'll make sure it hits hit your pledge. You don't need the number. No. No.
Well, it's easier.
No, as
They
the
don't,
counter,
As
as
the
the counter,
counter.
I know that all we need is the name.
We just need the name. As long as you write clearly on it, we could even get away. And that's something we want to eventually talk about for next year, because the envelope's already in process this year, is do we even want numbers anymore? There's really no functionality for us from a financial perspective, even from a tracking, as long as people have their names on it, we can then, make sure that it goes and gets tracked against you. And that would save us a lot of money. That's $1,000 that can go to, some more bentos.
Any other questions?
We talk about being wasteful, so we get all options. I hear one for every week of the month. And we use, like, I give my pledge once a month. And I use only one envelope out of there.
Right.
So the rest of the weeks are wasted. Is there anything we can do to remedy that?
Yeah,
Well-
we'll work on that. Yeah, we're definitely going to work on that, Stanley, right?
Yeah, we can,
We
we're,
only take one envelope.
yeah, so that's something that, we want to, start thinking about. The idea of using a one-color type of offering envelopes. And, for those of you who want to use offering envelopes, to distribute, and instead of having to have a numbered envelope, to have a offering envelope for the pledges or whatever,
So just to wrap up this part of the conversation, what I hear is many people don't need the weekly envelopes.
Right.
And what we might go to is one uniform offering envelope, and there is really not even a need for a discrete number for individuals, as long as your name is printed clearly on the envelope.
That's right. That's right.
So that's what we're going to work towards, right?
I think that's a good idea.
And then, right, on the pledge card, just indicate how many envelopes, if you're mailing them out.
that is a good idea to designate
Yeah.
if you want to give it quarterly or whatever, and then we can make the adjustment.
That way, we'll just have we'll have more generic type of pledge cards, or I'm sorry, pledge envelopes, right? And we'll send as many as you need. They won't be number based anymore. That's the idea. As long as you write your names clearly, that's the key for Gary and his team to make sure that they can count and account for it correctly.
Also, with the cost of postage going up so much, I can't imagine people are mailing a weekly envelope. People come to, if you're giving weekly as part of your pledge, I imagine you're probably coming to church to drop that into the offering basket or box that we have. So I would almost say those who are weekly givers can even get their envelopes right here on premise. The
Sure.
the
Yeah, 'cause
generic
they'll be
color.
they'll just be standard pledging envelopes. Right.
Yep. Okay, and just to give you an idea, when the church does have to mail the offering boxes, it costs about $5 to $6 just to mail that, which
Because of
is
the size,
more
right.
more than the actual envelopes are worth.
So the action item I hear coming out from this conversation is that we need to come back to the congregation to let them know what next year's process will be for the pledge envelopes. And we should put that in the good news, and we should also announce it from the pulpit, what the process will be, so everyone knows.
Yeah. So that'll be for next year, unfortunately, because at this point we've already ordered the envelopes and they're here. So this year will be kind of as is, but all great ideas. I've been trying to push for this for a long time to streamline. So I'm glad it kind of came up in this conversation. It's great.
Any other questions? Okay. Well, okay, thank you everyone for participating. I want to thank Jane, Scott, and Gary. And I want to also thank all of you for staying and giving us ideas, because this is really, really helpful. And I'm glad that we had this conversation. All right.
All right, thank you all.
Thank you all, and I really appreciate your input. All right.
Thank you.
Have a great rest of the day.